So the next thing that you can do with the traumatized client is normalize the impact. Now, do you understand why it's so important that you get more education about what we just talked about? Because you can't normalize that which you don't know is normal. Or I like to say normative. Right? Because what the heck is normal? But we know what's normative, meaning the way most people respond or behave. And the reality is, trauma is just the brain doing what the brain does. I mentioned that we're trying to take the D off and just call it post-traumatic stress. It's not a freaking disorder. Do you know why we added the D in the first place? So veterans could get paid for their therapy, meaning or their therapist could get paid. The only way you could send a veteran to a therapist and have that therapist be paid, you had to think of the trauma as some kind of mental illness. It's not a mental illness, folks. I mean, it's classified that way, but it's just the brain doing what the brain does. And remember, your attachment network inhibits your threat network. And so normalize that for folks. Normalize the notion it's normal to pause and assess and freeze. We didn't even get into the actual immobility responses. But there are responses where people literally can't move their bodies in response to trauma. It's called tonic and collapsed immobility. There's a response called dissociation where you just stare off into space. And that's about the circuit in your brain that allows you to be aware of what's happening to you in your body. It cuts it off. Because you're being sexually assaulted, why the hell would you want to be in touch with that? Or if you're being abused by a spouse, why would you want to be in touch with all that pain physically? Not to mention the emotional pain. So that's called dissociation. This is all normal. And this is what it means to normalize. What it means to normalize is listen to someone's experience and say, you know, I know a little bit about this, and I just have to tell you, soft eyes. That's just your brain doing what your brain does. I want you to know there's nothing wrong with you. You are somebody who is suffering from an experience that you had. In the prison, again, pardon the language, but it was a prison. We don't say fudge. Inmates would come up to me and say, Chris, I feel fucked up. And my response back to them was, you're not fucked up. You've been fucked with. That is the God's honest truth. So use their language. If they say, I feel so messed up, you're not messed up. You've been messed with. And this is just how your brain is dealing with it, because that's what brains do. You don't have to be a therapist to say that. And I would encourage you to have the courage to, if you feel comfortable, sharing with folks. There is nothing wrong. You haven't done anything wrong, and there's nothing wrong with you. Your brain is just doing what brains do. And yes, it is painful for you, and you're suffering. And to the extent that I can help, I want to. All right, boundaries, boundaries. I want you to be hearing their themes today. Soft eyes, boundaries. Soft eyes, express understanding, boundaries. You gotta know what grounding is. You have to know what grounding is if you're working with traumatized clients. I'm starting to appreciate the accompaniment. I'm thinking about it as my own soundtrack. Like there's a dude in the back of the room who's got bottles, and he's just like blowing on the top of the bottles. Yeah. Or doing the glasses. Oh no, I'm serious. I'm starting to like it. Okay, we're gonna try this one. Yeah, no. I'm a musician. I played there's nothing we're going to do about it. It has to do with input. Yeah. It's all good. Like I said, I'm starting to actually enjoy it, and I mean that seriously. But you have to understand grounding. So here's what grounding is. Sorry, I just got a text message from my partner who's in a foreign country and is safe. So I've been waiting for that. Otherwise, I would have disconnected. Anyhow. Okay, so grounding is this. Grounding is helping someone get in touch with reality, because very often what happens to the traumatized individual is they lose touch with reality. They get triggered, right? The Danger Will Robinson is hypersensitive, so they get triggered. They smell something, they see something, and the brain sees it as threat because the brain is generalizing. The brain is saying, I don't want you to get hurt again. So anything even remotely close to the smell or the sound that occurred before I was victimized, we're going to react. So they're getting triggered. I'm now starting to sound like a broken record. In the longer talk, the other thing we would have talked about is that when you get triggered a lot, access to your hippocampus, to that map of safety, map of danger, gets impaired. So if you've sat with somebody who's been triggered and is dissociating, if you just don't do anything, they're not just coming back. Does that make sense? They're not just going to snap out of it. They're going to stay right there, boom, gone. Because they don't know fantasy from reality. Mindfulness is a way of helping people ground themselves in reality. Now, the cool thing about mindfulness is this. A, it's brain training. Now, a lot of people associate it with Buddhism. That's great, because it is. But that's not great, because Christians are like, well, I can't be mindful. I'm not kidding. I used to work in a prison, right? What do you suppose the percentage of born-again Christians is in a prison?
High.
Is there a number above 100%? Like, I swear to God. No pun intended. So it's just brain training. And I will tell you, as a psychologist who's now studied this and read the research, if you're not practicing mindfulness, it is like not exercising and not eating healthy. You are robbing your brain if you are not practicing this and you don't have to meditate. If you do, it's better, but you don't have to meditate. All you have to do is notice. Just notice. Now, if you want to do a mindfulness practice, when the mind wanders away from the thing you're noticing, you go, oh, there it goes, back to noticing. Just did a mindfulness exercise. Notice your breath right now. Just notice the air coming in and out. As soon as your mind goes to, I can't believe you just asked me to do that. That's so stupid. Why is he asking? Oh, wandering mind. Oh, look at that. Let me just go back to noticing. You just did a mindfulness exercise. Now, it only lasted 3 seconds, but you know, one of the things we talk about with folks is just start stringing those moments together. Here's the thing. When you notice the breath, when you feel your hand on your face, like just feel it, focus on it, that activates your left prefrontal cortex. Your left prefrontal cortex, see, you can follow me here, your left prefrontal cortex wraps around and has neural connections to the amygdala. When you stimulate the left prefrontal cortex, it soothes the amygdala. What? How cool is that? So, you know, we used to say to trauma victims, take a deep breath. Right? A lot of crisis intervention was based on hard eyes. What I need you to do right now is focus. Take a deep breath. Right? That's not helpful. It's more helpful to use soft eyes and say, see if you can just feel your feet in your shoes right now. I know that sounds crazy. See if you can feel your feet. See if you can notice your breath. See if you can count the tiles on the ceiling. Professor Garvin, right? She keeps a can full of pencils on her desk in her office. She uses that. Can you count the pencils for me? That's all you have to do. You don't have to do the actual mindfulness exercise of focus, refocus, focus, refocus. You just have to do the notice. That's grounding. You have to know that if you're going to be trauma-informed. You're going to work with traumatized clients. It's absolutely crucial. And the cool thing is, right, when I train law enforcement, that's how we try to convince them to have advocates in the room. Because you don't want an investigator going, now, if you could notice your breath for me, right? But you want an advocate in the room who can say, hey, I think we should take a time out. And the law enforcement officer goes, oh, yeah, you're right, we should. Because their person is dissociating. And how easy is it to have a good interview with a victim who's dissociating? None. None easy. And the last thing is, remember soft eyes. Because the brain's job is to create meaning. Other than just keep you alive. Part of the brain's job is to create meaning, because meaning is what leads to the richness of life. So that's an inherent process. Dan Siegel at UCLA now, for years now, has been studying something that he calls interpersonal neurobiology, which is the study of how does the brain do relationships, taking neuroscience and applying it to how do we interact.